November 1908. High in the Bolivian Andes, a military regiment surrounds a remote, dark boarding house. For hours, bullets tear through the adobe walls. Then, a sudden lull in the gunfire. Inside, a man screams. 2 quick shots ring out, and the mountain goes quiet. The next morning, authorities found 2 dead men inside. Nobody knew their real names at the time. They were simply 2 American bandits. But the world would soon come to believe that one of them was Robert LeRoy Parker, the mastermind the law knew as Butch Cassidy. Parker's life began among the quiet, pastoral routines of the Utah Territory. He was the eldest of 13 children born to English Mormon pioneers, raised in a log cabin near Circleville. His drift into crime was a gradual slide. It started with the theft of a pair of jeans and a pie, but soon escalated to delivering stolen horses to buyers in Colorado and racing horses for profit with his associate Matt Warner. By the time he walked into the San Miguel Valley Bank in 1889, he was no longer a petty thief. He was the leader of a professional crew that walked away with $21,000. The law briefly halted his momentum. In 1894, he was sentenced to 18 months in the Wyoming State Prison for horse theft and running protection rackets among local ranchers. A governor's pardon in 1896 was intended to rehabilitate him. Instead, it served as a clean slate, allowing him to abandon small-time rustling and architect a criminal syndicate that would span 3 countries. He began recruiting a circle of specialists into what became known as the Wild Bunch. Among these hardened outlaws was his closest friend, the Sundance Kid, a man whose reputation for speed and precision balanced Cassidy's talent for planning. Their criminal operations reached a massive scale. They hit major trains and mining payrolls, moving with a speed that left posses hundreds of miles behind. After a heist, the gang would shatter in different directions, reuniting weeks later at impregnable geographic hideouts like Hole in the Wall. The success of these robberies came with a rising human cost. The gang killed multiple sheriffs during their escapes, a fact that eventually broke down Cassidy's secret attempts to negotiate amnesty with state governors. By operating across multiple state lines, the Wild Bunch inadvertently forced a change in law enforcement. Local agencies were compelled to coordinate and modernize, creating a unified front that made the gang's traditional hiding spots increasingly vulnerable. An act of simple vanity provided the lead that years of tracking could not. 5 members of the gang visited a Texas studio to pose for a formal portrait in their finest suits. The Pinkertons acquired the photo and used it to generate high-quality wanted posters. For the first time, lawmen had a reliable way to identify Cassidy and Sundance. With the Pinkertons dismantling the gang, Cassidy and Sundance fled to New York City. In February 1901, they boarded a British steamship bound for Argentina, hoping the law wouldn't follow them across the equator. They spent years ranching in Patagonia, but the detectives were persistent. Once Pinkertons located their ranch, the men abandoned their herds and returned to robbing banks, eventually fleeing north into the mountains of Bolivia. Their flight to another continent proved that the world was becoming an interconnected, industrialized space. The ability to outrun a criminal record was disappearing, regardless of how many borders they crossed. By 1908, Sundance's girlfriend at a place had returned to America. The 2 men were working as payroll guards for a tin mine under aliases, but they eventually relapsed, ambushing a silver mine's transport for its payroll. They were identified by a stolen mule they brought to a boarding house in San Vicente. The owner recognized the mining company's brand and notified the local military, leading to the overnight siege that ended in those final shots. Authorities found the men the next morning with multiple wounds. Based on their positions, the police report speculated that Cassidy had shot a fatally wounded Sundance to end his suffering, then used his final bullet on himself. The Bolivian police buried the men in unmarked graves. Because they were unable to positively identify the bodies at the time, they officially recorded the deaths of 2 nameless bandits, leaving the fate of Butch Cassidy legally unresolved. This lack of a formal identification created a loophole. Without a verified body, the story of Cassidy's death became a matter of perspective rather than a matter of record. Modern investigators have spent decades trying to close the case. In 1991, forensic teams exhumed graves in San Vicente, but DNA tests on the remains failed to find a match with the outlaw's descendants. This scientific uncertainty fueled claims from Cassidy's family. His sister and neighbors in Circleville insisted he return to Utah in 1925. visiting his father and eventually dying of natural causes in the Northwest under a new identity. Recent excavations at his childhood ranch even uncovered human bone fragments, but the samples were too degraded to provide a genetic profile. The physical evidence remains as elusive as the man himself. Whether he died in the Andes or a quiet home in America, Robert LeRoy Parker stayed ahead of the law just long enough to ensure his name remains synonymous with the myth of the Old West. He escaped the finality of a prison cell, leaving behind a story that refuses to be buried.